Hi and welcome to my talk. I'm Cuneyt Akcora from University of Manitoba, and I will be talking about our work on topological data analysis for ransomware detection on the Bitcoin blockchain. In this talk, I will be talking about two things mainly. First, I will talk about cryptocurrencies and blockchain and give you some preliminary concepts. And then I will talk about how hackers use cryptocurrencies to demand ransom. Assume that one day you turn on your computer or you arrive in your office, turn your computer, and you are faced with this screen that says your computer has been infected and your documents, your photos have been encrypted, you cannot access them. And to decrypt your files, you need to pay a ransom amount to a Bitcoin address that is created by the hackers. And it usually lists a time until that you have to pay and then an amount. Ransomware is a type of malware that infects a victim's data and resources and demands ransom to release them. In two main types, it can block access to resources or encrypt their content. In addition to your computers, ransomware can also infect your Internet of Things devices, your mobile devices. It can, for example, infect smart devices in your home and demand ransom. Once the resources are locked or encrypted, usually the ransomware communicates with the command center and notifies the hackers about how many files were encrypted and what was the size. Depending on that, hackers can ask certain amounts of Bitcoins to be sent to a Bitcoin address. This amount depends on the size of the encrypted resources. Usually after the payment, the decryption tool is delivered to the victim. Sometimes there are some problems, so even though you pay, you will not get your documents back. This is not only confined to computers or your work devices. There was a very famous case of Ashley Madison website. They leaked their database, and this website was matching married people to each other for extramarital affairs. So once the database was leaked, hackers could see the emails in the database and found the users on Facebook and other social networks and saw their family members and spouses, and they threatened the users with disclosing this information and basically blackmailed individuals. So this has been growing, and ransomware is not limited to companies or computers now. The problem was always there. Even before Bitcoin, hackers were demanding ransom. But now, Bitcoin is used worldwide, and hackers can access your computers over the internet. So the problem has been more acute now. Cryptocurrency-related crime and criminal abuse of blockchain technologies are one of the fastest growing type of cybercrime. And usually, it is very easy to demand ransom money because all the hackers need to do is they have to deliver a public Bitcoin address to you, which is a very short, small text, and you have to do the payment yourself. So before we go into ransomware, I want to talk a little bit about blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin, the first blockchain, started in 2008, and the first data block appeared in 2009. And after especially Bitcoin became popular around 2012, we have seen an explosion of new blockchains, and some of them are used by big institutions such as Ripple, and some of them brought software code to blockchains such as Ethereum. And this whole ecosystem has seen tremendous evolution, and there are so many more technological concepts that are developed right now these days. If you look at the computer science conferences, all major conferences are full of blockchain publications. Blockchain itself is a distributed ledger. That means there is a distributed book about user balances, and every node in the network keeps that book. In the Bitcoin's case, the chain data contains financial transactions, but it doesn't have to be. Blockchain just assumes a chain of data blocks, and in the Bitcoin's case, it's only a financial application of the blockchain technology. And Bitcoin transactions work like this. Assume that you want to send Bitcoins to two addresses, A and B. We can visualize this transaction with three types of entities on a network. The circles here denote addresses. and the rectangle in the middle denotes a transaction. So 3 Bitcoins enters the transaction node and exits to addresses. In this case, for example, the outputs sum to 2.8, but the inputs sum to 3. The difference between outputs and inputs is the transaction fee that is collected by the miner. Next, if the address B wants to spend 2 Bitcoins that it received in this transaction, it needs to show proof that it received these 2 Bitcoins. So Bitcoin is a bit interesting that in real life, when you want to spend $10, you just take a cash bill and you don't have to tell anyone where did you receive it from. On Bitcoin, you have to show the proof of funds. So this creates a network of traceable transactions. In this case, for example, if B wants to spend its own Bitcoins, then we can see this whole network starting from end and going to the beginning. This kind of allows us to visualize the network and see what is happening. And we will be using this. However, things are not as easy as it sounds. In this figure, for example, consider the address A, and remember the address A is the circle, the red circle, and the transactions are the rectangles in the network. And if I ask you the question, where do the Bitcoins at address A come from? Well, everything is public. In this network, you can see which addresses are sending money to transactions and how these Bitcoins are flowing in the network. But the problem is not easy. In this small example, the Bitcoins at A could have come from 9 different addresses. This implicates a very large portion of the network. And if we look at Bitcoin graph, for example, there are so many connections between addresses that if you want to go just one hop in any direction on the network, you reach almost 70% of the Bitcoin network. So although everything is public, it is very difficult to find a signal about address A in this network. So, and these efforts are useful because once the hackers receive your ransom money, they just cannot go to an online exchange and sell these Bitcoins for fiat money. Because online exchanges have know your customer rules, so they know your identity. If the police in the future come to the exchange and says, who owns this Bitcoin address, the exchange has to give this information, and then you are arrested. So what they need to do is they need to create these artificial transactions in the network to hide the flow of coins. And at the end, for example, here I am showing red nodes. Assume that these 2 Bitcoins belong to the hackers, they create or participate in these fake transactions, and at the end, they receive their Bitcoins in a clean address. Clean in the sense that it will be very difficult to link the address at the beginning to the address at the end. These schemes are known as coin mixing schemes. There are many more techniques, for example, leaving Bitcoin, going to another blockchain and coming back. So these things are used. Coming back to the ransomware again. So you arrive and then you are faced with this screen. You have to, for example, in this case, buy 0.94 Bitcoins. And in the time of that screen, it was $5,000, but right now it is around $12,000, $13,000, right? So you don't have these Bitcoins. Basically, you may have never even heard of Bitcoin before this. Imagine these ransomware issues started in 2012, before Bitcoin was very common, mainstream. So when we look at the transaction network, we see this pattern. The ransom entity here knows that address 0 must receive the ransom amount. So this address 0 belongs to hackers. The ransomed entity first needs to go to an online exchange or to a bank. Banks are selling Bitcoins these days, but they were not selling in the past. So usually entities go to an online exchange and pay in US dollars, for example, and buy the Bitcoins. And the exchange usually aggregates a lot of small Bitcoin amounts in a transaction that is shown with transaction 1 here, T1. So this is the transaction where the ransomed entity buys these Bitcoins and then takes them into his own address, that is A1. Next, the ransomed entity creates a new transaction, T2, and pays the ransom amount to address 0. And then once the address 0 is used, hackers know that the ransom has been paid, so they are supposed to give the decryption key. When we look at the Bitcoin network in our experiments, we see that usually there is a considerable time gap between T1 and T2. It is as if the ransomed entity buys the Bitcoins and then makes a final decision after, let's say, 10 hours, 12 hours to create the transaction T2 and pay the ransom. This pattern is very useful. Can we do better? This is the main research idea. So here are our 5 research questions. We say, what features extracted from the Bitcoin network can be used to detect ransomware behavior? We see the full network. Does a given ransomware family, because there are hundreds of different ransomware types, each one is supposed to be managed by a different hacker, let's say, do they show the same behavior? Next, when the hackers receive your ransoms, do they use the same behavior to kind of lose track of these dark Bitcoins? They need to hide their tracks because otherwise the police will catch them. The fourth question and the fifth one are the main research problems. In the fourth one, we say, okay, we know that there are ransom payments, and we know some of them because some companies report that they are ransomed, but most of the time a company would not disclose the ransom payment because it would show that the company does not have the security infrastructure to secure resources. So the company just pays without disclosing anything. Can we catch these payments? And the fifth question is, if we know some ransomware behavior from past, can we use that behavior to detect the emergence of new ransomware families? So when we detect something, it may belong to past ransomware families, or we may have detected a very new ransomware. We cannot know this, but can we identify these payments? This is the idea. So fortunately, we have some data. So some entities, for example, companies have disclosed that they have been ransomed and they shared hacker addresses with police. Around 25 hacker addresses were known when we did this analysis. Can we learn something from these addresses? This network that I'm showing at the bottom here has many transactions and addresses, but the idea is very similar to the initial toy network that I showed. So here, for example, we have 7 transactions and multiple addresses in them, and the amounts shown on the edges are the Bitcoins. From this network, we extract 6 network features. The features are not important, but we designed them to quantify known coin obfuscation behavior. So kind of we know how the hackers move to hide their tracks, and we devised these features to encode this information. These are income, loop, neighbors, weight, count, and length. For example, income means how many Bitcoins this address is receiving, which is a very important feature because in the beginning, ransomware was always asking, let's say, 0.5 Bitcoins or 1 Bitcoin. If we use these features naively, if we just look at past ransomware addresses, and if we try to similarity search on the network with known ransomware payments, we actually get a lot of true positives. So if you consider this, catching ransomware payments is kind of easy, even with an exact search. However, there are too many false positives. So if you are a security analyst, if you are police looking for addresses, if we give you, let's say, 10,000 addresses, and we know that 1,000 of them are correct, this will not really help you too much because you have to search too many addresses. By search, I mean you have to go to the online exchanges and you have to ask for the identities of people behind these addresses. And if you ask 10,000 of them, the security analyst has to spend a lot of time. So we are trying to reduce the search space here because just basic pattern search is not feasible. But our task is not also very easy. Here I am showing you ransomware behavior from 6 different families. So once we extract the features of known past ransomware addresses, here we are reducing the dimensionality by using stochastic neighbor embeddings. And 6 features are reduced to 2 features that are TSNE1 and TSNE2 in each figure. And for different perplexities, perplexity is a parameter in TSNE that says how many neighbors should you consider when you look at a data point. We see that there is some behavior. Hackers of one ransomware usually behave similarly somehow, but there is no global pattern. You cannot say CryptoLocker ransomware payments and addresses use the same pattern. We cannot say this, unfortunately. We have to go deeper. For this purpose, we use topological data analysis. In this figure, I am showing you TDA mapper that clusters addresses based on their 6 features. And the number in the cluster, here each cluster is shown with a size, and the number in the cluster shows how many data points there are in this cluster. And the number next to the cluster shows how many known past ransomware addresses appeared in that cluster. So this is guilt by association. If an address of today clusters in the same set with past ransomware addresses, we can say that this address also may be a ransomware address. So on 6 features, we create this map 6 times, 1 for each, and we look at how many times an address is found suspicious when we look at that feature. TDA mapper is great in that it gives you this partial look. And the results show that performance depends on the ransomware family. Some of them are managed by very smart hackers. They don't use the same pattern, so the precision can be low. However, recall is very high. So in our experiment, we look at these false positives and we try to understand why they are false positives. And we found that many of these addresses are found repeatedly across days as suspicious. So we believe that these are really true positive ransomware addresses, but we have not heard of them. Nobody reported this. And in these next 2 slides, I will give you the results for precision and recall. Here I am showing precision and recall for different ransomware families, and recall can be as high as 0.9, which means we catch 90% of the ransomware addresses for the Loki family, for example. And in general, we make 16.59 false positives for each true positive. So the security analyst needs to look at 17 addresses to find 1 true ransomware address. This is important because consider that the Bitcoin network has almost 800,000 addresses daily. So we are looking across years and our performance is still great. For the next slide, I am showing you how we predict the emergence of a new family. So here, for example, cryptics, when it appears on that day, we predict 2 addresses as suspicious, and one of them is in fact a known cryptics address. So that is great. If you are a security analyst, that means we will give you 2 addresses and one of them is true positive and the other one we are very highly suspicious that is also a ransomware address. In general, in all of these works, we compare topological data analysis methods with basic clustering such as dbScan. We use random forest, we use XGBoost. We don't use deep learning because we don't have that many ransomware addresses from past. In all cases, in these slides, for example, I showed you the top 2 performing methods. TDA almost always had the best results. In the previous slide, for example, it was always TDA. In this 22nd slide, we see that dbScan, which also ignores some of the clusters if they are not well formed, can also have good results. This work has been published at ISHCAI 2020, and the paper is already online. Please see it for more details. And if you are new to blockchain and you would like to work with blockchain data, please send me an email. And also you can find our basic blockchain reading from a graph theoretical point of view at this survey called Blockchain, a Graph Primer. Thank you for your time.